Story 1. I knew a guy at university. He was nice but not very intelligent and did clueless things. Here are a few examples. He would close all the windows and doors when cooking to trap in the heat and cook things faster. He put a whole tin of baked beans in the microwave after stabbing a knife in the top, despite being told not to because it was a metal tin. When warned, he replied, "The hole in the top stops the reaction." After urinating in the mop bucket in the kitchen, he said, "It doesn't matter because urine is cleaner than bleach anyway." He put a wool sweater in the dryer and wondered why it shrank, saying, "It shouldn't have done this. They only tell you not to do that so they make more money at dry cleaners." He was the last one to leave before Christmas, and we asked him to empty the bins. He didn't, so you can imagine the smell, let alone the fungus growing on the moldy food. He said, "It shouldn't have a smell or fungus because I put the lid on." After drinking a dirty pint and vomiting over other flatmates' dishes, he remarked, "I don't get why it made me sick. I eat all those separately anyway." He smashed ceiling tiles and didn't understand why he was fined, responding, "I pay rent anyway." There are plenty more incidents, but those are the ones that stand out. Story 2. One day, my brother and I were in the kitchen as teenagers when he filled the sink to wash dishes. The sink got nearly full, and when he tried to turn off the tap, it wouldn't budge, so the water kept flowing. We both tried but couldn't get it to stop. That's when panic started to set in as the water was rising quickly, and we didn't want to flood the kitchen. My brother started filling big saucepans with water from the sink to prevent it from overflowing while I scrambled under the sink, frantically searching for the main water shutoff to turn it off. But I couldn't find it. At this point, I was really panicking, so I took over the saucepan duty while my brother rushed off to find our dad. Dad came running in with my brother, and we were shouting at him to find the main water shutoff. But instead, Dad calmly walked over to the sink and pulled the plug out, letting all the water drain away. Story 3. This woman I used to work with, named Nicole, would often forget her tasks whenever we taught her something new or when a policy changed. My coworkers and I joked that her mind could only hold so much information at a time, requiring her to be retrained frequently. Story 4. My neighbor Larry once tore down our fence because he wanted a bigger yard. My yard. Story 5. I have worked with a flat earther for 3 years and still cannot tell if he is joking or not. I'm not sure if that makes me worse. Story 6. My friend has more degrees than a thermometer. I would not trust her with soup. She could make mistakes a 4-year-old would not make. I care for her, but she seems to be heading towards a Darwin Award. Story 7. The person I lost my virginity to believed I couldn't get pregnant because we were not 18 at the time. 18 years later, that is still the most foolish thing I have ever heard. Story 8. My nephew once tried to explain to me that there was no such thing as outer space. Took me a moment to realize that he was a flat earther. I initially thought he was joking and then went on to explain why that belief is nonsensical. He then shifted the topic to claim that the moon landings were a hoax. He's in his 30s, but if you were unfortunate enough to read anything he posts on social media, you would think he was a rather dim 13 or 14-year-old. Somewhere out there, there's a village desperately searching for its fool. Story 9. This girl and I had a 20th century history class together. We were in the United States, and on the way out of class one day toward the end of the semester, she asked her friend, "Wait, are the Soviets us?" Story 10. I know a 38 or 39-year-old woman with polycystic ovaries, and she thinks it means there is pollen on her ovaries and it is harming her. Story 11. I'm currently staying on a farm where the farmer, after 25 years of supposed experience, still has no clue how to do anything. He has basically dismantled all the items that came with the farm when he purchased it and is soon running out. I can see him from my window right now, heavily pruning budding fruit trees that should not be pruned at this time. Some of them will probably die, but he believes that risk is always present with pruning. It isn't. It's just the wrong season. I told him, and I know my botany, but he doesn't care because he has 25 years of experience. These trees are his livelihood. He has barely any savings, makes no money anymore since his mortgage is paid off, and he grows his own food, which is how he survives. He has never done anything he doesn't like cleaning, organizing, or maintenance. He is surprised that all his cars and tools break down constantly without any upkeep, blaming capitalists for his problems. He couldn't plan one day ahead if his life or that of his 3 underage children depended on it, let alone a season or a year. One big problem, and this farm goes bankrupt. At 50 years old, he has severe attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which doesn't help, and he is one of the least competent people I have ever met. Interestingly, a friend was dating a girl about 25 years ago who he asked to bring broken light bulbs for his father's photography darkroom, and she did, the sweetheart. Story 12. Taking a world history college class, a young woman became very upset with the professor for discussing pre-written history, Neanderthals, and similar topics related to pre-civilization. She argued that the Earth isn't that old, and there were no such thing as cavemen. The professor attempted to remain reasonable, but after a few minutes, the discussion escalated into cursing on her part. He told her to leave or he would call campus security. She never returned. What were you expecting from a college history class? I mean, you signed up and paid for this. This was about 15 years ago, before the current political climate. It seems she was ahead of the curve. Story 13. My cousin nearly drowned in the shower, so now he only takes baths. He has no disabilities, holds a degree, and has a 6-figure job, though I have no idea how he achieved that. He mentioned that water would run up his nose and suffocate him. He also eats steak with a spoon because he believes that cutting the meat with a knife will make him develop a love for cutting meat and turn him into a serial killer. Story 14. Probably a coworker. I could go on and on about this guy. He likes to take a lunesta and a glass of box wine to sleep at night, but apparently it makes him super thirsty. Thirst hit him the other night, and he stumbled out of bed looking for something to drink. He grabbed a cup off his dresser and drank it, nearly spraying what he just swallowed all over his bedroom. The cup was half full of steak marinade. Who keeps a half-full cup of steak marinade in their bedroom? This guy is just wild. Story 15. I once knew a guy who was dating my friend. He always said silly things. One day, he became so angry at us for laughing at him that he decided to prove us wrong. I'm not that stupid. I know my periodic table. Hydrogen, potassium, calcium, syphilis. I nearly died laughing. Story 16. I worked with a coworker who always cleaned the grill aggressively every night. The grill had a shelf above it filled with pots and pans. When he scraped the grill hard, it would shake, causing the pots and pans to fall on him every time. He was there for about 2 months before quitting. I should have recorded it and made a compilation. Story 17. A colleague I work with, in his 60s and grossly overweight, is a born-again Christian and a supporter of certain ideologies. He pays for multiple OnlyFans accounts and claims the creators genuinely like him and that it's different because they call him sweetie. Additionally, he frequently hits on women half his age, but insists he is a real gentleman. Story 18. My stepson's dad is a nice guy, but he has chosen to live far enough away from his son for 14 years to avoid much of the mundane responsibility. He shows up at events to take pictures and videos, but then complains and makes excuses if he needs to drive out for any other reason, especially if it doesn't offer an opportunity for a social media post. He has missed almost the entirety of his son's life and does not realize it. He has not been a substantive dad, acting more like a buddy every other weekend who takes his son to do what he wants. He doesn't teach him anything, sets a poor example, and talks to him only about his own experiences. It's sad because his son is a great kid who desperately wants his dad around more, but his dad just shrugs and says, I live too far away, buddy. He lives 50 miles away. Story 19. The most foolish person I know is a conspiracy theorist with a lack of basic education. He holds some bizarre beliefs and has immersed himself in extreme ideologies, embracing harmful viewpoints along the way. He denies scientific facts and frequently discusses individuals he deems wrong or bad, typically anyone who is not like him: doctors, scientists, women, minorities, and members of the LGBTQ+ community. Almost everything seems to offend him. It has been unsettling to witness how this mindset affects him deeply. Story 20. Personally, I believe the height of stupidity is not low intelligence or lack of knowledge. Instead, It is a contempt for knowledge and pride in one's ignorance. The president, the leader of the most powerful nation on earth, boasts about not knowing where Lesotho is in a speech he knows everyone will hear and wants them to hear. He takes pride in his ignorance. Being proud of one's ignorance is among the most foolish things anyone can do. It demonstrates a lack of understanding regarding the value of intelligence and knowledge. A coworker of mine and I were discussing the local school district banning classic books. He mentioned he didn't care because books had never affected him. I shared that some books I had read had changed my life. He was genuinely shocked by this and was proud of not caring about books. Story 21. I once said to someone, "I've got 2 words for you. I'm not foolish." Of all the words I could have used in that sentence, foolish had to be one of them. Another time, my friends and I were walking somewhere and saw a sign indicating how to get there, with a bicycle icon next to it. I told my friends, "That's okay. It's only 2/3 of a mile by bike." As if walking the distance would be different. I was much younger and a lot less wise. Story 22. I have allowed people to manipulate me for most of my life. It was only last year, after being diagnosed with autism, that I began to understand my experiences. With training, therapy, and new skills, I am now the most content I have ever been. Story 23. Wife's former coworker took a $30,000 car loan at 30% for a used Nissan. His credit is very poor. Additionally, he misses 60% of his work shifts and complains about his paycheck. Story 24. A student in my college art history class asked the teacher who Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo were. He had never heard of them. He was Mexican and we were in Mexico. Story 25. My stepdaughter is an intelligent woman, but she makes some questionable decisions. These decisions have cost her her job, home, and partner. She now lives with us, and her actions may lead to her being evicted again. Story 26. I have someone who created an entire video about my post history, where they genuinely believed that humorous posts on a comedic subreddit were real. Story 27. My neighbor, who supports Donald Trump, believes that every cryptocurrency or Bitcoin mentioned by him is the next big opportunity. He talks about becoming wealthy by investing spare change over months in digital currency and the stock market, all while supporting a man who would likely not rent him an apartment if it came to that. Story 28. I worked with a woman who absolutely would not believe that England is on an island and is not part of mainland Europe. To be fair, she was very intelligent in other ways and was a lovely person. Story 29. The person I know who struggles the most intellectually is my dad. I love him, but he can be quite clueless. Thankfully, I was raised in a way that helps me navigate challenges, so I can find my way out of a difficult situation. Story 30. I once had a woman who was very upset that she couldn't find plain Sprite and only the lemon lime version. She has a driver's license and can vote. That's concerning. Story 31. My friend's dad is about 45 years old and always talks like a 15-year-old. The worst part is that he stares at me when he visits. Story 32. A person with a $70,000 truck payment commented that my $5,000 Mercedes was the worst financial decision he had ever seen. In reality, it was the most reliable car I have ever owned, and that individual has since rolled negative equity into a new truck. Story 33. My mother unfortunately has less emotional intelligence than my 5-year-old. She makes mistakes online that I would expect much older people to make. She can't manage money to save her life. Story 34. There is a woman at my work who is a staunch supporter of Donald Trump and genuinely believes that Elon Musk is a genius. We are in Australia. I was astonished when I realized she was not kidding. Story 35. I was kayaking down a river at dusk in Missouri with my boyfriend. It was really quiet, and we overheard a group of people setting up their camping spot next to the river. One man was shouting, "Dale, the tablecloth doesn't fit." To which Dale replied, "Get a smaller table, stupid." Story 36. A guy I know asked why the news discusses how much physical space is required to build a computer. Don't they just use cloud computing? Story 37. My football coach and history teacher told us that Martin Luther King Jr. nailed the 95 Theses to the door of the church to start the Protestant Reformation. Story 38. A lady I used to clean with was about 10 years older than me and made sure I knew it. We were driving home from a cleaning job and discussing conspiracy theories when she mentioned a video she saw that blew her mind. It was about how the human population keeps growing while the weight of the Earth hasn't changed. I then explained to her what gravity was. Looking back, it might have been a little rude, but she shouldn't keep walking around discussing the weight of the Earth. Story 39. My mother-in-law saw a large steam locomotive and asked if it is man-made. She has had several similar comments and questions. Story 40. I wish people would stop thinking this way. It's so outdated. We are trained almost from birth to believe that everyone lies somewhere on the scale of intellect between an idiot and a genius. The truth is, there are no absolute morons, just as there are no pure geniuses. People's intellectual abilities change from moment to moment and are applicable in various ways in different situations. We take people and try to reduce the complexity of their intellect and potential into one-word classifications that we are comfortable with. It hurts me to see people self-identify as being stupid because I feel they were led to that conclusion over many years by people who couldn't teach a fish to climb trees and eventually just stopped questioning it. Story 41. My new boss. Despite being warned multiple times, he got out of a taxi in Hong Kong on the traffic side of the car. Passing car smashed the door. He later tried to expense it. He has programmed programmable logic controllers incorrectly, causing tens of thousands of dollars in damage that required rework and significant downtime for customers. Story 42. I have been working in healthcare in various roles for 10 years. Most of my time has been patient-facing. I have seen some challenging situations. I can't name a specific person due to privacy regulations and my memory, but some people's children stand out. During the first Trump election, one man was convinced I couldn't tell him how I was voting because of privacy laws. He was one of our pharmacy patients, and sometimes I can think quickly when being questioned. He was relentless in wanting to know who I was voting for. When I finally got a chance to speak, I told him, I can't tell you that because of privacy regulations. He stepped forward, lowered his voice, and said, "Oh no, sweetheart. I wouldn't want you to get in trouble. I know you'll do the right thing. I just cannot. I need to find a remote job where I don't have to speak to people." Story 43. Unfortunately, my best friend had a great marriage, 3 kids, a house, and everything. She demanded that they move from his home state to Florida because it was too cold, then insisted he buy her a Camaro and undergo plastic surgery. She started going out more, met a man 20 years older than her, and began cheating. She eventually divorced him and has been going back and forth with this man. She is now pregnant with him. Even though he is very abusive, and despite being together for a year, he refuses to let her inside his house. I think he is still married and in an open relationship, just controlling her, but I have no proof. I've told her to come move to my house and live up here, but she is reluctant. Story 44. My brother wanted to try meth. That was 4 weeks ago. He has been a completely different person since and is now experimenting with fentanyl. He is in denial about his addiction, claiming, "I never got addicted to marijuana." Yes, he did. He would struggle to get off Delta 8 cartridges. Story 45. A friend of mine was dating a girl who was working on her PhD in criminal justice psychology. She was over $100,000 in student loan debt and was in her 11th year of studies. My hobby is listening to true crime podcasts, so my husband told her, "My wife is oddly interested in serial killers too, so you both have that in common." She smiled and asked who my favorite serial killer was. I, of course, have one and named Israel Keys. She looked at me blankly and said, "I've never seen that one. Mine is Freddy Krueger. I guess I'm just more into psychological terror than slasher horror." $100,000 for that? Story 46. At an auto manufacturing plant, we had 2 trucks parked side by side. The team leader was attempting to make repairs and asked if I knew anything about the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. We had a known problem that would occur if the center console was installed incorrectly. I assumed it was this issue, so I offered to show him how to fix it. I went over to the trucks, and he mentioned that the one on the left wasn't blowing air very hard. He stood between both trucks and used his left hand to feel the air from the left truck and his right hand for the one on his right. To my surprise, he was wearing a glove on his left hand. I said, "Seriously?" He nodded, prompting me to tell him that I couldn't help him, and walked away. Story 47. When I lived in Virginia, I knew a kid in my neighborhood who would hide behind parked cars and jump out at passing vehicles because he loved to hear them slam on the brakes. Story 48. I used to work with a girl named Natasha. She isn't super outgoing, but she doesn't know how to read a room. Although her heart is in the right place, she lacks the education or experience to stand up for herself. One day, I had to explain to her, in very simple terms, that the company wasn't spying on us through our computer's microphones. Instead of playing an audiobook, she could just physically mute her computer. She won a company award, though I'm not sure how, and then quit a week later because she didn't like the prize. Afterwards, she made a post explaining why she quit, but the allegations she made were simply not true. She wasn't making them up. It was just how she interpreted the situation. However, she could have checked her information for a quick fact check, but she simply wouldn't do it. She is a different kind of ignorant, and I don't know how to explain it. Story 49. My father would often scream at me to make him a sandwich. In response, I put a large amount of mustard on it. He became aggressive, believing it was trying to harm him because his father had inhaled a small amount of mustard gas during World War II. He genuinely thought that having the dome light on inside the car while driving would land him in jail. My grandmother also lacks knowledge. Since high school, she hasn't read a book that wasn't the Bible or a Bible study guide. She went on a tour of Japan that included Hiroshima. Before her trip, I told her about the shadows of people being burned onto the sidewalks. She dismissed me, saying there was no way that could happen. When she returned, it was all she could talk about. Story 50. Many older individuals are reluctant to unlearn misconceptions they have been taught that have been proven to be incorrect. Story 51. There are many contenders, but I think my brother's friend might be the one I would choose. He has always engaged in questionable behavior, getting caught and then moving on to something new. He is heavily involved in drugs, which I believe has affected his judgment. Since the pandemic, his foolishness has reached new extremes. He became a strong conspiracy theorist and has started believing in various theories. Last I heard, he thinks Australia is not real, birds are not real, chemtrails cause cancer, hot air balloons are computer-generated images, and that the September 11th attacks were staged. He claims the COVID-19 vaccine causes everyone to die from heart attacks or cancer, insisting that every death is solely due to the vaccine. He managed to convince his father not to get vaccinated, and a few months ago, his father had a heart attack and passed away. Now he is scrambling around because he has been proven wrong at the expense of his father's life. His belief that he is smarter than everyone else makes it even worse. He takes pictures of people in the street if they are doing something silly and captions them "stupid triple vaccinated person," as if he has any knowledge of their vaccination status. It's embarrassing to witness. Story 52. A high school student I overheard debating bread and how to avoid crust said, "If everyone hates crust so much, why don't they just cut them off before baking?" Story 53. I have learned not to confuse degrees with intelligence. Just because someone's parents paid for a few degree certificates to hang on the wall does not mean their offspring earned them with their own effort. This individual has a couple of degrees, but is the least intelligent person I have encountered in person or in a professional setting. While working with him, he would constantly make mistakes and poor decisions. He took pride in completing his education without reading a book, insisting that reading was unnecessary. I witnessed him strike spray paint cans with a shovel until they exploded all over his work truck. He acted surprised and laughed each time while we were simply disappointed. I have seen him smoke cigarettes and enter confined spaces filled with gasoline vapors, prompting someone to pull him out quickly by his harness. This occurred multiple times, and fortunately, someone was always there to supervise him to prevent potential accidents. He believed it was acceptable to introduce his preteen son to drugs and boasted about using drugs with his children on several occasions. He claimed his truck did not need gasoline and insisted he could will it to keep running. We attempted to explain the concept of a reserve fuel tank to him, but he refused to believe it. He said he kept filling up only to prevent the office from seizing his fuel card. Eventually, he ran out of fuel while stranded on an off-ramp on the highway. A truck driver stopped to offer assistance, and Brian reacted poorly, pushing the driver and verbally confronting him. The driver responded by spitting in Brian's face and leaving. This incident upset Brian for months, and he frequently talked about it, often altering the story and lying about the details. However, the dash cam footage confirmed the driver's account. He did not pursue legal action. Brian was assigned to manage a department and estimate small jobs. I believe the company owner intentionally placed him in this role to witness his failure and justify eliminating that department. They were childhood friends, which seemed unprofessional. I was tasked with supervising Brian and teaching him how to use spreadsheet software. He consistently refused to learn new skills, and everything he worked on would inevitably fail. He was eventually terminated for stalking female employees and following them home to speak with them. Brian committed so many foolish acts that it's hard to recall them all. Primarily, he smoked, drank, used drugs, engaged in poor parenting, and blamed others for the problems in his life. He enjoyed provoking people and would do things specifically to elicit anger. If any of his actions upset someone, he viewed it as a success. He never admitted to being wrong, and nothing was ever his fault. Now, he is married to an older woman, and they both practice Scientology. Story 54. A family friend claims that seatbelts are useless and defends not using them. Yes, she drives without wearing a seatbelt. My only hope is that if she crashes, it is into a pole and does not hurt anyone else. Other than that, the next least informed person is probably me, but I'm not sure. Story 55. I knew a girl named Mel in middle school. One day in science class, she got her finger stuck in a soda bottle. She panicked and created a big scene, and it took almost the entire class to get it out. Not 2 minutes later, her friend came by and asked, "Hey Mel, what was all that commotion? What happened?" Mel replied, "Oh, I got my finger stuck in this bottle." And just like that, her finger went right back to being stuck in the bottle. I bet she is a politician or a CEO by now. It seems like the least competent individuals often end up in the cushiest jobs, running interference for the wealthy elite. Story 56. My former coworker Josh would put his arm in a tube twice, and the second time his arm got stuck. Story 57. My dad is very technically and mechanically smart, but doesn't know how to read the room at all. He has been in trouble at work multiple times for repeated behavior, abusing his position or authority, and always thinks what he did isn't bad, so he keeps on doing it. The only thing that has saved him is the union and his seniority. Story 58. My mother-in-law can say things that cannot be unheard and cause emotional damage that is difficult to reverse, all for 3 seconds of satisfaction when arguing with someone. Story 59. This freshman named TJ from my old high school was a massive racist and anti-Semitic individual who thought his comments were funny. Some of the things he said included, "Jews are the worst people ever. Worse than the presidents. They don't eat pork or believe in God. Specifically, my God, Jesus Christ, I'm not going to respect them. They'll burn in hell too. Japanese people are literally aliens. They don't have normal eyes. Why is it wrong to assume they aren't normal people? If you're having trouble learning Spanish, why don't you just hire someone to teach it to you? It's the same thing. South Park always depicts Muslims as terrorists. That's why I think Muslims are terrorists. Anytime we told him to stop saying those things out loud in class, he claimed we were hindering his freedom of speech. Story 60. One of my in-laws called my husband college boy and made fun of him for going to the city. Even though they both grew up in a DC suburb, he considers himself a country boy, despite also growing up in a DC suburb, and he has more children than anyone else in the family. Story 61. One of the janitors at work is a nice guy and he's fun to talk to because he says so much absurd stuff that it's kind of entertaining. It's usually incomprehensible as well, but it's kind of a what for the time thing when you listen to him. I'm convinced that this guy has some kind of brain damage or fetal alcohol syndrome because his brain just doesn't function normally. I accidentally broke a jar of something one day and he offered to clean it up for me. Part of the jar was still intact, but instead of picking it up and throwing it, along with its contents, in the trash. He dumped it out onto the floor with the rest of the spilled stuff. I asked him why he didn't throw it in the trash, and he just said, "No, man, that doesn't make sense. I have to clean it up anyway. You aren't thinking smart about it." My favorite thing about him is that he will be talking with you and arguing one side of an issue, then suddenly, without any awareness or smooth transition, he will just start arguing the completely opposite side of the issue as if that were his view all along. It does no good to tell him he is contradicting himself because he just goes off on another tangent. It's kind of startling at first, but you get used to it. Story 62. This woman stated that cloud storage is in the sky above us, among many other ill-informed comments. Story 63. My maternal grandmother. When she says, "I know," it means she doesn't know. I realized she was not very bright by the time I was 4. She is so uninformed that I thought my maternal grandfather was intelligent. Recently, when I observed him alone, I realized he is not as uninformed as she is, but he is still not very bright. Story 64. I used to work with a woman who believed you had to buy the special edition of an Xbox 360 to play a game. For example, to play Halo 3, she thought you needed to purchase the Halo 3 edition of the console, and to play Call of Duty, she believed she had to buy the Call of Duty console. She literally owned over 20 Xbox 360 consoles and would unplug one system and hook up another to play a different game. When she went to buy a new game, she would trade in a few consoles at low trade-in prices because she was no longer playing those games. She never traded in the game discs, only the consoles. This is the same person who gave a 2 weeks notice, called in sick on her last day, came into the store she claimed she was too sick to work at, and was shopping. Story 65. My friend Gabe is like Joey from Friends, mixed with a challenging upbringing, having been homeschooled by his mother who did not finish high school. He is genuinely kind and would give you every penny he has, along with the clothes off his back if you needed them. However, he can be quite foolish. Story 66. An old friend of mine said that evolution was just a theory after a lengthy conversation about dog breeds and unnatural selection. While he is not wrong in saying it is a theory in scientific terms, he does not understand that scientific theories and colloquial theories are different. Here's the kicker. He thinks anything other than heteronormativity is a mental illness. Story 67. One of my good friends and I were both sick once. I gave him some of my Tylenol cold and flu pills. He looked at them suspiciously, disappeared for a few minutes, and then returned, pointing to an ingredient on the package. He asked, "Isn't this what Michael Jackson died from?" No, it was not. Story 68. A girl I attended high school with once asked if the rumble strips on the side of the freeway were for visually impaired individuals. Story 69. I once saw someone microwave a metal spoon because they didn't believe in science. That moment still haunts me. Story 70. My sister. I have never seen her say anything even intellectually average in my life. It is just a stream of nonsensical words. Story 71. This guy I work with sold his service weapon to pay bills and was upset when he was told to go home and not return until he retrieved it from the pawn shop. Story 72. Thankfully, I no longer know him, but he was profoundly ignorant. He literally freaked out when a form asked for his zip code, saying, "Who even knows their zip code? How can I possibly look that up?" I told him to check his mail, and he replied, "How do I know they got it right?" He thought the movie From Hell was similar to Shrek, without any creative similarities to point out, just that they were essentially the same movie. He jokingly pointed a pellet gun, not an airsoft but one that fired metal pellets, at my face and pulled the trigger. Thankfully it was empty, but even with an air cartridge, you should never do that sort of thing with any gun that isn't literally a toy. He got angry with me for breaking down a cardboard box because we don't know for sure if cardboard has feelings or can feel pain. He didn't understand why a job had the right to tell you when to be there or why they would be upset about him being consistently an hour late. He was also involved with my wife, now my ex, even when it was clear she had issues, which was also foolish of me. He is easily the most illiterate person I have ever met. I wouldn't be surprised if he couldn't spell his name. He believed seatbelts were a scam and claimed, "There's no proof they are effective." I nearly wanted to get into a wreck just to show him. He failed his driving tests repeatedly for reasons like running a stop sign because In his words, nobody was there, or speeding, claiming, I know what I'm doing. He asked a police officer who pulled me over, what would you do if I tried to steal your gun? And saying, bad boys, at him as he walked away. Of course, the officer turned back around and harassed us some more. He argued with my landlord, without me knowing, that my wife and I had squatters' rights, insisting we only needed to pay rent for 1 month every 3 months. He would write bounce checks to his landlord because he couldn't comprehend that the value of the check depended on the amount of money in his bank account. He thought the check itself was like cash, allowing you to write whatever amount you wanted on it. His mother also wrote the checks for him because they confused him. He attempted to bargain for everything he bought, which was exhausting and never worked. He also didn't understand that the phrase "Jew them down" was a racist term. I could go on and on. He did not use drugs, including cannabis, or have any mental conditions or medical issues that I was aware of that could explain his behavior. The only positive contribution he made was representing my wife in our divorce. He was able to convince her to sign a part of the form stating no money was owed to either party, despite both of them believing I was required to pay back her share of the rent, food, and bills she had to cover while we were married, simply because she's the woman. While filling out her side of the paperwork, he asked for my social security number. I told him it was 12 34 56 78 9, and he didn't even pause after writing it out, which translated to 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. Story 73. My wife's mother and 2 sisters are every pyramid salesperson's dream come true. Fortunately, they are all too cheap to really dive in, but I have seen everything: cookware, vitamins, cleaning cloths, candles. It took about 15 years for me to slowly start stemming the tide. We had a new house with an open floor plan for entertaining, so our place became the epicenter of scams. Even if my wife wasn't buying in, she would be asked to host. Finally, after several years of parties, I sat my wife down and told her the truth. She became upset and defensive, and I said, look, our friends actually think less of you and your intelligence every time you host one of these things. Not at all what she wanted to hear, but I had been avoiding the subject for too long. She decided to host the party anyway. Not one person came, not even our closest friends. It was just the 3 of them sitting there, talking to each other about these mops. It was honestly very sad, and I had no heart for "I told you so." I just thought, the 3 of you are otherwise fairly together people. How can you be this foolish? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.